I want you all to imagine a world where there is mass famine, drought, plagues, poisoned oceans, severe flooding, and record heat waves. Sound like a nightmare or something out of a dystopian movie? Unfortunately, as soon as the end of this century, this is what parts of our world will look like. So what exactly causes this kind of devastation? Greenhouse gas emissions that are increasing in this moment as I speak. In David Wallace Wells' book, The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming, this is the picture of our world he paints, a conclusion he draws from countless climatologists and researchers he had interviewed, along with several scientific papers he had read on the subject of climate change. According to the Environmental Protection Agency in 2016, the greenhouse gases are comprised of carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases, which all trap heat from the sun and lead to rising global temperatures. Because we only have one world that we live in, it is vital that we do something about this problem, especially with our current administration being the hardest administration that there was on rolling back funds and climate change policies. So, I've done some extensive research on this subject for the past few weeks, and luckily I'm here to tell you that there is a viable solution. By having the US government impose a nationwide regulation on businesses contributing the most to greenhouse gas emissions, we can help mitigate the problem. So first, let me walk you through the negative impacts of rising greenhouse gas emissions has on both the people and the environment. Then I'll show you a plan to help reduce these emissions before finally showing you some statistics that can prove this plan is in fact an effective one. So first, we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. Aaron Bernstein, Associate Director of Harvard Medical School Center for Health and the Global Environment says, quote, even a small increase in global temperature can lead to troubling consequences. These consequences include rising temperatures, rising sea levels, and increased precipitation, which negatively impact both the people and the environment. As Bernstein details, rising temperatures lead to decreased crop yields, droughts, and extremely dry conditions that are devastating for both the farmers and the agricultural sector in the United States. Furthermore, a warmer atmosphere creates the perfect climate for wildfires, which leads to deforestation. This actually compounds the problem because trees have the ability to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which only means higher greenhouse gas emission levels in our atmosphere. Next, as the ice caps melt, sea levels will begin to rise. This means that salt water can actually get into groundwater tables and ruin and contaminate clean drinking water supply, which disproportionately puts populations at lower lying areas at a disadvantage and makes them more susceptible to waterborne diseases. Furthermore, higher sea levels can actually end up engulfing cities that are along the shoreline. The United Nations announced on September 17th during their climate conference that sea levels are predicted to rise by 2 meters in less than 100 years. Under this prediction, Miami and the lower third of Florida are to be underwater. As a Florida resident myself, this is just a little concerning. And finally, a warmer atmosphere leads to abnormally heavy rains because it holds more moisture than a cooler one. This can cause increased precipitation, or even worse, unprecedented spring flooding, especially for the Midwest states. For example, on May 2011, a devastating spring flooding swamped over 130,000 acres of farmland and destroyed over hundreds of homes in the state of Missouri. Currently, according to the World Resources Institute's global data available in 2013, the United States stands as the world's third largest global emitter, accounting for 14.36% of total global emissions. And sadly, these emission levels are forecasted to rise along with temperatures. The 2013 Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Summary for Policymakers forecasts that temperatures will rise from 2.5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit over the next century. This begs us to do something about the problem. There is, however, a plan that can help mitigate this problem. We can target total emissions by having the US government implement a nationwide policy on businesses that are contributing the most to greenhouse gas emissions. So, where does the most emissions come from? Well, according to the Environmental Protection Agency data in 2016, there are two largest sources of greenhouse gases. The first being from electricity, and the second being from transportation. And today, we will target the transportation sector. So, let's take a look at what one state has done about this problem. The California legislature has implemented, back in 1990, what is called the ZEV, or Zero Emission Vehicle Regulation. According to the California Air Resources Board fact sheet on this regulation, ZEVs, or zero emission vehicles, are vehicles that rely either partly or fully on alternative energy resources, being either hydrogen fuel cells, electricity, or battery. Now, these ZEVs are significantly lower emitting. For example, a normal vehicle using gasoline or diesel emits at 500 grams of greenhouse gases per mile. Now, on the other hand, a ZEV will emit under 200 grams per mile. So, here's how the regulation works. The regulation targets all car manufacturers within the state of California, requiring them to produce a certain number of ZEVs corresponding with their total sales in that year. The higher number of sales, the more ZEVs they are required to make. Each ZEV manufactured is assigned an electric driving range. The higher this range is, the more credits that they are assigned. Now, the entire regulation is based off of this credit system. For example, in 2018, the credit requirement was 4.5%, which translated to 2.5% of sales to be in ZEVs. Now, fast forward to 2025, that requirement rises to 22%, which translates to 8% of all sales to be in ZEVs. As you can see, as years go on, more and more percents of ZEVs are required by the car manufacturers to be produced. Now, this regulation currently is just a California regulation, but it is easily translated to a nationwide regulation. All the United States government needs to do is take the parameters given by this regulation, and instead of imposing it on just California car manufacturers, expand it to all car manufacturers within the United States. This expansion to a nationwide plan can help reduce greenhouse gases at a faster rate. Now, you may have some questions in mind about the practicality of this plan, or maybe just about climate change in general. So today, I'll address 3 possible questions that you may have. The first being, is this plan actually effective in reducing greenhouse gases or greenhouse gas emissions? The second is targeting just the transportation sector enough in mitigating the problem of global warming? And finally, is climate change actually a real phenomenon? So to begin, you may have some doubts as to whether or not this plan is an effective one in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Well, I can tell you that it has certainly worked for the state of California. According to California's Air Resources Board, greenhouse gas emissions have been on a downtrend since lately. California had a target to bring emission levels down to below 431 million metric tons by 2020, but they had in fact already reached this goal in 2016, hitting 429 million metric tons. Emissions from transportation have also been on a downtrend since the early 2000s and has hit a low in 2013. However, there has been a slight upturn lately. But before you discredit the program, this is due largely to lower gas prices and the Trump administration rolling back climate policies. The California Air Resources Board goes further to say that pollution from transportation would have been much worse at the level, much worse than it is today, if it hadn't been for the ZEV regulation. 9 other states have also adopted a regulation similar to California's, and these include Connecticut, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Vermont, and they have confirmed this program's effectiveness. Another question you may ask is that, is just targeting the transportation sector going to be enough in mitigating the problem of global warming? And my answer to that is, although the difference may not be largely significant, still, yes. Global warming is a huge problem, with many different contributors to it. Because transportation is the largest contributor, it's logical that we target this area with a nationwide policy first. Of course, there needs to be much, much more done to mitigate the problem of global warming, but transportation is a logical place to start. Now finally, the last question I'll answer for you today is climate change real? The simple answer to that is yes. For those of you who are in doubt, Aaron Bernstein, cited previously, has done much, much more research on this topic than I have. He is a Harvard climate researcher after all. And he has seen that countless researchers, climatologists, Scientologists, and scientific papers confirming that greenhouse gas emissions are the main culprits behind global warming and are caused by human activities such as manufacturing. So, to sum everything up, today I showed you the negative impacts of increasing greenhouse gas emissions and what it does for both the people and the environment. It increases temperatures, increases sea levels, and increases precipitation. Finally, next, I showed you the California ZEV regulation, a plan that can effectively lower greenhouse gas emissions. And then I showed you the practicality behind this plan by citing California's emission statistics. So I hope you all can agree with me today that we need to do something about the global warming problem and greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. That the US government needs to implement a nationwide plan to regulation on all car manufacturers. And believe it or not, the power is in your hands. So you can go to your local representative or state senator and let them know about the California ZEV regulation and let them know about the severity of global warming. And in the meantime, you can practice some environmentally friendly acts to start the ball rolling. Instead of taking your car to work, take the bus, take your bike, take a walk. Remember, the power is in your hands, and the smallest act has the biggest difference on global warming. Thank you.